The rhythm sharks, come on up and get some calendars, please. I copied up 1,500 of them. They're like scrap paper for the next 30 years.
Transcribed to say 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, what I loved about music was that it was complex, and you could go as deep as you wanted to. So in other words, you could play one form of music, and you wouldn't necessarily have to get too deep into theory and such. But like studying jazz, what I loved was the mystery of it and how complex it was. And the more you learned, the more you wanted to know. And it wasn't necessarily. I enjoyed performing, but I loved the freedom of improvisation. So once you got to a certain level and you could really speak the language, then it's a conversation you're having with people in the group. And when you have a good night and you're really saying what you want to say with the instrument, it feels amazing. Like the improvisational part of it's what I loved. I liked players that had their own voice. People that they could play one bar of music and you could tell who that was. You know, as far as like that goes, you know, I didn't ever want to necessarily copy somebody's style, but just the idea was that you have your own voice, so you have to find your voice, and then once you have that, that's yours. And it should be. I mean, honestly, when we speak, we all speak the same language, but we all sound different. My godmother had a boyfriend. At the time, this was when I was in high school, and they came to visit one summer, and he started playing this acoustic guitar that we had, and I thought it was amazing. He was doing all this fingerstyle playing, and I was super impressed, and thought nothing else of it until about, I don't know, a few months later, when a package arrived in the mail, and it was an acoustic guitar that he had sent. Picked it up, started practicing out of like little books that I bought, and it gave me sort of something to really work towards, and that was exciting. I had played other instruments before and didn't care too much about it. For some reason, I got some traction with the guitar. Then once I got a little bit of feedback, or started to get a little bit of like results, that's all I could think about. 1988. I think 88 had just turned 20, or maybe at 19 turning 20. I saw an article in, I think it was Guitar Player magazine, or Guitar for the Practicing Musician. And the article was on Salvador, and it was talking about how he is like the greatest guitar teacher. And so I looked it up, and it turns out he lived in Connecticut, and this was like before the internet. So I picked up the Stanford phone book, called every Salvador I could find. And eventually I got him, and I asked him if I could study with him, and he said, well, you have to take an audition, and if you pass the audition, you can study. So I ended up going down there, auditioned, and he took me on as a student, and that was it. That was the beginning of obsessive practicing. So Sal his whole thing was, he had you not practicing like a guitar player, but practicing as a musician. So he had us studying out of like 26 different volumes of different types of music books at the same time. So we worked out of the Arbin trumpet book, the Kreutzer Etudes for violin. We did the Modern Mallet Method book. several guitar volumes that he had written. He had written like 6 or 7 books that we studied out of as well. There was stuff that we worked on that was like, it was going to be a 2-year mission. Like we had certain books that, you know, we had the Kreutzer Etudes for violin. We had to first learn them, then we had to memorize them, and then we had to play them up to speed. In other words, he had a certain speed on the metronome that he wanted those played at. Well, that process was like a 3-year process. He had a certain level of expectation. The amount of stuff that he had us practice, I would work 15 minutes out of every volume every day, and it would still take me 6 hours minimum to get through that list of books. So every day, just to get through his lessons, was about 6 hours of practicing. I would take 5 minutes break every hour. I was working various odd jobs at one point at Domino's Pizza, and I worked from 4 till midnight, get done about 1 o'clock. So I would practice all day until 4. Then I'd go to work. My boss, when it got slow, would let me practice scales in the back. I would basically sneak in any moment I could get into playing during the day. I liked playing. I was always nervous before I performed. I was self-conscious, but it didn't affect my playing. I played better with an audience than on my own. When you go on stage, I always felt that it sort of focused me, and I could play better. But I enjoyed the improvisational part of it. I loved the audience feedback. I mean, it was great just getting a reaction from folks that liked the band and enjoyed coming out. I mean, people came to see us every night, and there was a camaraderie with that, and there was like, you know, you get the feedback depending on how you played. Some nights were better than others. I never drank when I played because I didn't want to be affected, because I felt like as the night went on, I would play better, but I always played sober for that reason. I don't think, like, I've always been surprised at whatever it is that I get interested in, because it's not necessarily, I don't necessarily have control over that. Just something piques my interest, and then I have to have it, like it's a mystery and I want to solve it, and then that's where that comes from. And just really wanting to understand it. Like when I was first moved to New York, I started looking at the architecture, and I wanted to understand the decorations of all the classical buildings. And then I started learning that was all about the orders of architecture, and that there was a whole study behind that, and I became obsessed with that. I just read everything I could get my hands on. And so for whatever reason that interested me, and then I had to really understand it. Because I couldn't just, it wasn't enough just to know a little bit about it, I had to know everything about it. And I think that's just my nature. I don't have control over that necessarily. So, you know, something all of a sudden becomes interesting to me, and then it becomes extremely interesting, and then I can't let go of it, and I have to know everything. I think with a lot of these things, the pursuit is kind of outside of your control. It's not so much, you have to want to work that hard at it, because otherwise you won't. And then what I find, if I don't have something I'm really super interested in, that's like the worst thing in the world. So I have to have some pursuit that I'm chasing.